The tremor in my hand started 3 months ago. Or was it 4? Time had become slippery lately, days bleeding into nights, moments fragmenting like shattered mirrors. I stared at my coffee cup on the kitchen counter, watching the dark liquid ripple from my shaking fingers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya, you're doing it again. Dr. Richard Chen's voice cut through my fog, gentle but clinical. The dissociation. Can you tell me where you are right now? I blinked, suddenly aware I was sitting in his office, not my kitchen. The transition felt instant, terrifying. How had I gotten here? I remembered making coffee, and then nothing. I don't know, I whispered, my voice cracking. I was home. I was just, I don't know. My husband Victor sat beside me, his hand covering mine with practiced concern. To anyone watching, he was the picture of a devoted spouse, eyes filled with worry, voice soft with compassion. But I caught it, just for a second. The flicker of satisfaction in his expression before his mask of concern settled back into place. "This is getting worse, doctor," Victor said, squeezing my hand. The pressure felt wrong, possessive rather than comforting. Last week she left the stove on for 3 hours. Before that, she accused our neighbor of breaking into our house and moving her things. Mrs. Patterson was terrified. "I did see someone," I protested weakly, but even to my own ears, the words sounded hollow, desperate. The kitchen drawer. All my recipes were rearranged. "Maya." "Sweetheart," Victor interrupted, his tone patient but firm, the way you'd speak to a confused child. "We talked about this. You rearranged them yourself. I watched you do it. You just don't remember." Did I? The memories felt like smoke, impossible to grasp. I'd been so certain, but Victor had shown me my own handwriting on new dividers in the drawer. Had I really done that and forgotten? Dr. Chen made notes on his tablet, his expression carefully neutral. "Maya, have you been experiencing any other symptoms? Headaches? Nausea? Changes in your sleep patterns?" "She sleeps 14, 15 hours some days," Victor answered before I could. "And when she's awake, she's not herself. Paranoid. Emotional. Yesterday, she broke down crying because she thought I'd canceled her pottery class. I would never do that. She loves that class." But I had loved that class. Past tense. I hadn't been in 3 months. Or had I? I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to sort through the confusion. There were flashes. The cool clay under my hands, the smell of the kiln, my instructor Patricia's encouraging smile. But when had I last seen Patricia? Last week? Last month? "I think I need to adjust your medication," Dr. Chen said, typing something. "The anxiety seems to be manifesting in more severe ways. I'm going to prescribe something stronger." "No," I said suddenly, surprising myself with the force of it. "No more medication. I want to stop taking everything." Victor's hand tightened on mine, just short of painful. "Maya, that's exactly what the paranoia makes you think. Remember what happened last time you stopped taking your pills?" I didn't remember. That was the problem. I didn't remember most things clearly anymore. But Victor had photos on his phone. Me, disheveled and wild-eyed, standing in our front yard at 2 a.m. in my nightgown. Me, with broken dishes at my feet, apparently after a violent episode in our kitchen. Me, with scratches on my arms that Victor said I'd done to myself. I had no memory of any of it. "I'll start you on a higher dose of the anti-anxiety medication," Dr. Chen continued, seemingly not hearing my protest. "And Victor, I think it's time we seriously discuss more intensive treatment options, inpatient care, at least for a few weeks, until we get this stabilized." The room tilted. Inpatient care, a mental institution. The thought sent ice through my veins. I'm not crazy, I said, but my voice was too thin, too desperate. No one's saying you're crazy, Victor soothed, but his eyes held that glint again, that barely concealed triumph. You're sick, honey. You need help. We all just want to help you. The drive home was silent. I sat in the passenger seat of Victor's Tesla, watching the familiar streets of Portland blur past. We'd lived in this neighborhood for 5 years. Or was it 6? I used to know every corner, every shop. Now it all felt alien, threatening. I'm trying to help you, Victor said finally, breaking the silence. His voice held a note of injury, the wounded martyr. You know that, right? Everything I do is because I love you. I know, I said automatically, because what else could I say? What else was there to believe? Our house appeared at the end of the cul-de-sac, a beautiful craftsman-style home with a garden I'd once lovingly tended. Now the garden was overgrown, wild. When had I stopped caring for it? Victor said I'd lost interest months ago, but I could swear I'd been out there just last week, pulling weeds and deadheading roses. Inside, the house was pristine, as always. Victor was fastidious about cleanliness, about order. Everything had its place, and God help anything, or anyone, that disrupted his perfect system. Why don't you rest? Victor suggested, already steering me toward the stairs. I'll bring your pills up with some water. My pills. Always my pills. Little white tablets that Victor doled out 3 times a day like clockwork. Morning, afternoon, night. I took them because Victor said I needed them, because Dr. Chen prescribed them, because everyone agreed I was sick and needed help. But as I climbed the stairs, my hand trailing along the banister, a fragment of memory surfaced, sharp and clear in a way nothing had been for months. I was in my studio, the small converted bedroom where I used to paint. Used to, because Victor said I'd lost interest in that too. But in this memory, I was painting something important. A portrait of who? The memory evaporated like morning fog. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In our bedroom, I sank onto the edge of the bed, the expensive mattress that Victor said would help my back problems. Had I always had back problems? I couldn't remember not having them, but I also couldn't remember when they'd started. Victor appeared with a glass of water and my pill organizer, one of those weekly containers with morning, noon, and night compartments. How considerate of him to keep me organized, everyone always said. What a devoted husband. Open up, he said gently, holding out 2 white pills and 1 blue capsule. I looked at them, really looked at them. What were they, exactly? I'd been taking them for so long that I'd stopped questioning. Anti-anxiety medication, antidepressants, mood stabilizers. Victor had explained it all when I was first diagnosed. But diagnosed with what? When? The timeline was fuzzy, fragmented. What are these again? I asked. Victor's smile never wavered, but something flickered in his eyes. Maya, we go through this every day. They're your prescriptions. From Dr. Chen. They help you. But what do? They keep you stable, he said, his patience wearing thin now. They keep you from having episodes. Remember last month when you stopped taking them for 2 days? You ended up calling the police, saying I was trying to hurt you. Do you want that to happen again? I didn't remember calling the police, but Victor had showed me the police report, my signature at the bottom, apologizing for the false alarm. I took the pills, swallowed them with water. Victor watched, satisfied, before leaning down to kiss my forehead. Get some rest. I have to go into the office for a few hours, but I'll be back for dinner. After he left, I lay back on the bed, waiting for the familiar fog to descend. It always did, about 20 minutes after taking my afternoon pills. The world would soften, my thoughts would slow, and I'd drift into a heavy sleep that lasted hours. But something was different today. Maybe it was Dr. Chen's suggestion of inpatient care, or Victor's barely concealed eagerness at the prospect. Maybe it was that flash of memory, my studio, a painting, something important slipping just out of reach. Before the fog could take hold, I forced myself up and walked to my studio. The door was locked. When had that started? I tried the handle again, certain it was a mistake, but no, locked. I checked my pockets for a key, but found nothing. The medication was pulling at me now, making my limbs heavy, my thoughts syrupy. But I fought it, stumbling down the hallway to Victor's home office, his sanctuary, where I was never supposed to go. He said it was because of work confidentiality. He was a pharmaceutical sales executive, handled sensitive information. The door opened easily. Victor never locked anything from me because he never expected me to question, to search, to resist. His desk was neat, organized with the same obsessive precision as everything else in his life. I pulled open drawers with clumsy, increasingly numb fingers. Files, papers, business cards, nothing unusual. But then, in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of quarterly reports, I found it. A notebook, plain, black, with no identifying marks. I almost missed it, almost gave in to the fog creeping through my mind, but something made me open it. The first page was dated 2 years ago. Victor's handwriting, neat and precise. Day 1. Initial dose administered at breakfast. Subject showed no awareness. Establishing baseline behavioral markers. Subject. He'd called me subject. My hands shook as I turned pages, reading entries that detailed a systematic, methodical campaign. Medications I'd never been prescribed, administered in my food, my drinks. Doses carefully calibrated to cause specific symptoms: memory loss, confusion, tremors, paranoia. Day 47. Increased evening dose. Subject experiencing more frequent dissociative episodes. Good progress. Day 89. Introduce Dr. Chen to the picture. He's cooperative. Pharmaceutical kickbacks ensure his loyalty. First official diagnosis established. Day 134. Subject now completely dependent on daily medication. Memory degradation exceeding expectations. Time to begin phase 2. Social isolation. I read about how Victor had systematically cut me off from friends, telling them I was unwell, unstable, that visits upset me. How he'd canceled my pottery class, my painting studio membership, my volunteer work, all while convincing me I'd done it myself. How he'd been slowly increasing dosages, carefully documenting my decline like a scientist recording lab results. But why? The question screamed through the fog in my mind. Why would he do this? The answer came several pages later in an entry dated 6 months ago. Life insurance policy increased to 2.5 million. Accidental death clause includes mental health complications. Dr. Chen agrees that escalation to inpatient care is the logical next step. Once committed, establishing grounds for permanent institutionalization should take approximately 6 to 8 months. After that, tragic suicide becomes feasible. Mental health statistics support the narrative. The notebook fell from my hands. He was trying to kill me. Not quickly, not obviously, but slowly, methodically, by destroying my mind first and then my life. The perfect crime, impossible to trace, easy to explain. Troubled woman, long history of mental illness. Despite best efforts of devoted husband and medical team, I had to leave. Now. The thought cut through the medication haze with crystal clarity. I had to get out, get help, before Victor returned. But even as I thought it, I heard it. The sound of the garage door opening. He was back. already. He'd said hours, but minutes had passed. Had he known somehow? Been watching? Panic surged through me, sharp enough to push back the fog. I grabbed the notebook, shoved it inside my shirt, and stumbled out of his office. I had to hide it. Had to. Maya? Victor's voice drifted up from downstairs. Casual, unconcerned. Honey, I'm home. I forgot my phone. I stood frozen in the hallway. The notebook pressed against my chest. My legs felt like lead, my thoughts sluggish despite the adrenaline. How long did I have before he noticed his office had been entered? Before he checked the drawer and found the notebook missing? Maya? His voice closer now, footsteps on the stairs. Where are you? Think. I had to think. But the medication was winning, pulling me down into its chemical embrace. I stumbled toward our bedroom, mind racing for options, for escape routes, for anything that might save me. I shoved the notebook between the mattress and box spring just as Victor appeared in the doorway. There you are, he said, smiling that concerned smile. Why aren't you resting? You look terrible. I felt sick, I managed to say. The pills, they made me nauseous. He studied me, and for a long moment I was certain he could see right through me, could see the knowledge burning in my eyes despite the fog. But then, his expression softened. That's the anxiety talking. Here, let me help you into bed. His hands were gentle as he guided me down, pulled the covers up to my chin, the same hands that had been methodically poisoning me for 2 years. The same hands that had documented my destruction like a science experiment. Sleep now, he murmured, brushing hair from my forehead. When you wake up, you'll feel better. You always do. I closed my eyes, felt him linger for a moment before leaving. Heard his footsteps descend the stairs, heard the garage door again, heard his car pull away. Only then did I let the tears come, silent and hot against my pillow. The medication was pulling me under now, impossible to resist. But even as consciousness slipped away, one thought remained, sharp and clear. I knew the truth now. And somehow, before he could finish what he'd started, I had to find a way to prove it, to survive it, to destroy him the way he'd tried to destroy me. The fog took me then, dragging me down into chemical darkness. But for the first time in 2 years, I didn't go peacefully. I went fighting, clinging to that single thread of truth like a lifeline in a storm. I woke to darkness and the sound of rain against windows. My mouth was dry, my head throbbing with that familiar post-medication hangover. I lay still, listening. Downstairs, I could hear the television, some sports game, the announcers' voices, a steady drone. Victor was home. How long had I been asleep? Hours? Days? I had no way of knowing anymore. My hand crept to the edge of the mattress, feeling for the notebook I'd hidden. For a moment of pure terror, I thought it was gone, that Victor had found it, that everything was over. But then my fingers touched the spiral binding, and relief flooded through me. It was real. Not a delusion, not another paranoid episode. I had proof. But what could I do with it? Who would believe me? Everyone. Dr. Chen, my former friends, even the police that night I'd supposedly called them. Everyone believed I was mentally unstable. Victor had spent 2 years carefully constructing that narrative. My word against his would mean nothing. I needed more. I needed evidence that couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be explained away as the ravings of a sick mind. The medication was still in my system, making thoughts difficult, but I forced myself to focus. What did I have? Victor's notebook, detailing his entire plan in his own handwriting. That was something. But he could claim I'd written it myself during a delusional episode, forged his handwriting. I needed something independent. Something that proved the drugs in my system weren't prescribed, weren't legitimate, blood tests, medical records. But how could I get them without Victor knowing? A sound made me freeze. Footsteps on the stairs. I shoved the notebook back into its hiding place and closed my eyes, forcing my breathing to slow, pretending to still be asleep. The bedroom door opened softly. I felt Victor's presence, felt him watching me. After a long moment, I heard him move to his dresser, heard drawers opening and closing. Then footsteps again, the door closing, blessed solitude. I waited, counting to 100, then 200. When I was certain he wasn't coming back, I opened my eyes. The room was dark except for the faint glow of streetlights through the curtains. I sat up slowly, fighting the dizziness that came with every movement. My phone. Where was my phone? Victor always left it on my nightstand after my afternoon naps, probably checking it first to make sure I hadn't tried to contact anyone. There it was, screen dark, mocking me with its uselessness. He controlled it just like he controlled everything else. Parental locks, he'd said, to keep me from accidentally calling people during my confused episodes, for my own protection. But maybe. I picked it up, fingers clumsy, and tried the emergency call function. That couldn't be locked, could it? It wasn't. The dial pad appeared, offering me a lifeline to 911. And tell them what? That my husband was poisoning me? They'd send an ambulance maybe. But then what? Victor would be there, calm and concerned, with his documented evidence of my mental illness. Dr. Chen would be called, would confirm my delusions. I'd end up exactly where Victor wanted me, committed, credibility destroyed, utterly under his control. No, I needed to be smarter. I needed to think like Victor thought, methodically, carefully, always 3 steps ahead. I set the phone down and forced myself out of bed. My legs were shaky, but I made it to the bathroom, turned on the light. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, hollow-eyed, thin, pale. When had I gotten so thin? I lifted my shirt, saw ribs that shouldn't be so prominent. The medication cabinet was locked, of course. Victor said it was for safety, to prevent me from accidentally overdosing during confused episodes. But I could see through the glass door, rows of prescription bottles, all with my name on them, all from Dr. Chen's practice. At a glance, they looked legitimate. But now I knew better. I needed one of those bottles, needed to get it analyzed somewhere, prove they contained something other than what the labels claimed. But how could I take one without Victor noticing? He knew exactly how many pills were in each bottle, marked them all in that obsessive way of his. Unless... An idea formed, crystallizing through the medication haze. It was risky, required waiting, required me to continue pretending. But it might work. I heard Victor's footsteps on the stairs again and quickly turned off the bathroom light, stumbled back to bed. The door opened just as I was pulling the covers up. "You're awake," he said, and I couldn't tell if it was a question or an accusation. "How are you feeling?" "Confused," I said, which was true enough. "What time is it?" "Almost 9. You slept through dinner." He sat on the edge of the bed, and I had to suppress the urge to flinch away from him. "I saved you a plate. Are you hungry?" The thought of eating anything Victor prepared made my stomach turn. But I nodded, playing the compliant patient. "A little." "Good. I'll heat it up for you. But first..." He pulled out my evening pills from his pocket. The little white tablet and blue capsule I now knew were slowly destroying my mind. "Your medication." This was my test. If I refused, if I showed any resistance, he'd know something was wrong. But if I took them, I'd lose more hours, more time I desperately needed to plan. I looked at the pills in his palm, then up at his face. He was watching me carefully, that clinical observer's gaze I now recognized from his notebook entries. I was still his subject, his experiment, And subjects who became non-compliant were, what? Eliminated faster? Committed sooner? I took the pills, put them in my mouth, accepted the water he offered, swallowed, let him watch my throat work, let him see the pills go down. Good girl, he said, satisfaction in his voice. I'll get your dinner. The moment he left, I spit the pills into my hand, now partially dissolved but still mostly intact. I shoved them under my pillow, heart racing. It wasn't much. A small rebellion, a tiny victory, but it was something. It was a start. The next morning, I woke with the clearest head I'd had in months. No pills the night before meant no chemical fog, no artificial confusion. My thoughts were sharp, painfully sharp, as if someone had turned up the contrast on reality. I could think, I could plan, I could fight, but I had to be careful. If Victor noticed the change in me, if he realized I was lucid, he'd adjust his strategy, increase the doses, accelerate his timeline. I'd read his contingency plans in the notebook. He was nothing if not thorough. So I played my part. When he brought my morning pills, I palmed them while pretending to swallow, then hid them in the bathroom trash wrapped in tissue. I stumbled and mumbled through breakfast, maintaining the facade of confusion. And when he left for work, kissing my forehead with those poison lips, I waited a full 30 minutes before moving. Then I tore the house apart. Not literally, Victor would notice that, but methodically, carefully, I began searching for more evidence. If he'd kept one notebook, there might be others. If he'd documented his plan so thoroughly, there had to be other pieces of the puzzle. I started with his office, now that I knew where to look. Hidden in the false bottom of his filing cabinet, I found financial records. Life insurance policies, just as he'd mentioned, but also others. Documents showing he'd been funneling money out of our joint accounts for years, building secret savings I knew nothing about. Enough money to disappear after my tragic suicide. In his closet, behind the Christmas decorations we never used, I found a burner phone. I turned it on with shaking hands, found text messages between Victor and someone listed only as DC. Dr. Chen, it had to be. Patient becoming suspicious. May need to accelerate timeline. Understood. Will recommend immediate inpatient. Can have her committed within 48 hours. Perfect. Increase evening dose in the meantime. Can't risk her connecting the dots. The messages were dated yesterday, after my appointment, after I'd asked to stop taking medication. He knew, or suspected, and he was moving faster because of it. I had less time than I'd thought. Maybe days. Maybe hours. I took pictures of everything with my phone, despite the parental locks that prevented me from sending them. At least I'd have them saved. Have something to show when, if, I got the chance. Then I found the pills themselves. Not the ones in the locked bathroom cabinet, but Victor's personal stash, hidden in his gym bag in the garage. Bottles with no labels, packed in unmarked containers. This was what he'd been giving me, I realized. Not prescription medication at all, but something else entirely. I took one bottle, hid it in my underwear drawer where Victor never looked. Evidence, proof, but still not enough. Not for a system that already believed I was crazy, that trusted Victor's word over mine. I needed an ally. Someone who would believe me, who could help me prove what was happening. But who? Victor had isolated me so completely. My friends were gone, convinced I was too unstable for visitors. My family, what little I had, lived across the country and believed the same narrative. Then I remembered. Patricia, my pottery instructor from the class Victor said I'd quit. But had I? Or had he canceled it without telling me, adding it to his list of things he claimed I'd done myself? I found her number in my old contacts. One Victor hadn't thought to delete. But I couldn't call. The phone restrictions prevented it. I'd have to go to her, find her at the studio. But how? Victor had my car keys, controlled when and where I went. Said it was for safety after I'd supposedly gotten lost driving to the grocery store. Another lie. Another manipulation. I could walk. The pottery studio was 3 miles away. Far in my weakened condition, but possible. If I left now, I could be there and back before Victor came home for his lunchtime check-in. The new routine he'd started last week. Keeping closer tabs on his deteriorating wife. The decision made, I moved quickly. I dressed in layers. It was cold, and I had no idea how long this might take. I grabbed the bottle of pills from my drawer, Victor's notebook from under the mattress. Everything I'd need to prove my story. The front door felt like a portal to another world. I hadn't been outside alone in months. The fresh air hit me like a shock, cold and clean and real. I started walking, each step taking me farther from Victor's carefully constructed prison. 3 blocks away, I realized I was being followed. A black sedan, moving slowly, staying about 50 feet back. My heart hammered. Victor? Someone he'd hired to watch me? Was I being paranoid again, or was this real? I turned down a side street, walked faster. The sedan followed. Definitely following, not coincidence. I ducked into a coffee shop, hoping the public space would offer safety. Inside, the warm smell of espresso and pastries felt surreal after so long confined to my house. People looked normal, living normal lives, and I wanted to scream at them that nothing was normal, that monsters wore human faces and called it love. Through the window, I watched the sedan pull into a parking spot. Watched a man get out. Tall, dark suit, sunglasses despite the overcast sky. He stood on the sidewalk, watching the coffee shop entrance. Trapped. I was trapped. And my phone wouldn't work. Wouldn't let me call for help even if I knew who to call. Miss, are you okay? The barista, a young woman with kind eyes, was looking at me with concern. You look really pale. Do you need me to call someone? I almost laughed. Call someone. Yes, please call someone, but who? Who would believe me? Who wouldn't just call Victor, alert him that his sick wife had wandered off again? I'm fine, I said automatically. Can I use your phone, please? Mine's not working. She hesitated, and I could see her weighing her instincts. Help this clearly distressed woman, or protect herself from potential craziness. Please, I said again. I just need to make one call. I'm not crazy, I promise. I just need help. Something in my desperation must have reached her, because she pulled out her personal phone. One call, she said. Then I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or I'm calling the manager. Patricia's number. I still remembered it, my mind blessedly clear without the medications. I dialed with shaking fingers, praying she'd answer, praying she'd remember me. Hello? Patricia? It's Maya. Maya Chen, from your pottery class. A pause. Maya? Oh, honey, how are you? We've missed you. Victor said you weren't feeling well enough to come anymore. Victor said. Of course, Victor said. Patricia, I need help. I'm in trouble. I'm at the coffee shop on Morrison Street and someone's following me and I can't. My voice broke. Please. You have to believe me. Victor's been drugging me, and I have proof, and I need help. Another pause. Longer this time. I could feel Patricia processing, weighing, deciding whether I was experiencing another one of those episodes Victor had probably told her about. Stay there, she said finally. I'm coming. 20 minutes. Don't leave. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming. The line went dead. I handed the phone back to the barista, who was looking at me with a mixture of concern and wariness. Thank you, I whispered. I'll wait over here. I found a table in the back corner, as far from the windows as possible. The man in the dark suit was still outside, still watching. My hands were shaking again, but differently now. Not from medication withdrawal, but from fear, from adrenaline, from the terrible awareness that Victor's timeline had just accelerated. He knew I was gone. He had to know by now. And he had people watching, waiting to bring his unstable wife back home where she belonged. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Every person who walked through the door made me jump. Every phone that rang might be the barista calling the police, or worse, calling Victor. But then Patricia was there, silver hair wild around her face, eyes searching the shop until they found me. She didn't hesitate, didn't question. She just walked straight to my table and sat down. "Tell me everything," she said. "And Maya, I believe you." Those 3 words, "I believe you," broke something inside me. Or fixed it. I couldn't tell which. But suddenly I was talking, words pouring out in a torrent, 2 years of gaslighting and manipulation and systematic destruction spilling across a coffee shop table while a stranger-turned-savior listened. And outside, the man in the dark suit watched and waited. Phone pressed to his ear, reporting back to Victor that his experiment had gone critically off script. Patricia listened without interrupting, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of tea she'd ordered but never touched. When I finished, she reached across the table and gripped my hand. "That son of a bitch," she said quietly. "I knew something was wrong. When Victor called to cancel your classes, he was too smooth, too rehearsed. But I had no idea." She shook her head. "What do you need? What can I do?" "I need to get this analyzed," I said, pulling out the pill bottle I'd hidden in my jacket. "I need proof that what he's been giving me isn't what the prescriptions say, and I need somewhere safe to stay while I figure out how to expose him." Patricia nodded decisively. "My cousin is a toxicologist at Oregon Health Sciences. I can call her right now. And you're staying with me. I've got a spare room and a very large, very protective German Shepherd." She paused, glancing toward the window where the man in the dark suit still lingered. "But first, we need to lose your tail." "How?" A slow smile spread across Patricia's face. "I've been teaching pottery for 30 years. Before that, I did some work you might call unconventional. Let's just say I know how to handle surveillance." 10 minutes later, I was in Patricia's car, an old but reliable Honda that she'd parked in the back alley behind the coffee shop. The man in the dark suit was still watching the front entrance, phone glued to his ear, completely unaware that his target had slipped out through the kitchen with the help of a sympathetic manager Patricia knew from her Tuesday morning yoga class. "Small world, connections matter," Patricia said as we pulled away. "Remember that, Maya. Victor isolated you because he knew that. People are your greatest weapon." We drove to her house in Northeast Portland, a cozy bungalow with a garden that reminded me painfully of what mine used to be. Inside, a massive German Shepherd named Thunder greeted us with enthusiastic barks before settling into protective mode at Patricia's command. "Make yourself comfortable," Patricia said, already pulling out her phone. "I'm calling my cousin. Then we're calling a lawyer. Then, and only then, we're dealing with your husband." I sank onto her couch, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the escape was fading, leaving behind bone-deep weariness. But I couldn't rest yet. Not until this was finished. Patricia's conversation with her cousin was brief and efficient. "She'll meet us at the lab in 2 hours," Patricia reported. "Meanwhile, I'm calling Sarah Brennan. She's the best divorce attorney in Portland, and she specializes in abuse cases." "I don't have money for an attorney," I said. "Victor controls everything, all our accounts." "Joint accounts?" Patricia asked. I nodded. "Then legally, half of everything in them is yours. Sarah will work on contingency if needed. Trust me, once she hears your story, wild horses couldn't keep her away from this case." Patricia was right. When Sarah Brennan arrived an hour later, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and an air of barely contained fury. She listened to my story with growing outrage. "I'll take your case," she said flatly. "No retainer. We'll sort out payment after we've cleaned out his assets. And Maya? We're not just getting you a divorce. We're putting him in prison." "But how?" I asked. "Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Dr. Chen will testify I'm delusional. Victor has 2 years of documented evidence of my mental illness." "Evidence he created," Sarah interrupted. "Which makes it fraud, forgery, criminal conspiracy with Dr. Chen, not to mention attempted murder." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "First, we get those pills analyzed. Second, we get you to a legitimate doctor for blood work, one Victor doesn't control. Third, we file for an emergency restraining order and freeze all marital assets. We move fast, we move hard, and we don't give him time to cover his tracks." "He'll say I'm having an episode," I protested. "He'll say I'm making it all up." "Let him try." Sarah's smile was sharp as glass. "I've dealt with gaslighting abusers before. They think they're so clever, so untouchable. But they all make the same mistake. They underestimate their victims. And they leave evidence. Your husband wrote down his entire plan in a notebook. He kept financial records. He texted his co-conspirator. That's not criminal genius. That's arrogance. And arrogance always loses in court. The toxicology lab was in a nondescript building near the hospital. Patricia's cousin, Dr. Linda Chang, met us at a side entrance with a security badge and a grim expression. "Pat told me the basics," she said, shaking my hand. "I've fast-tracked this. Normally this would take weeks, but I'm running it as an emergency poisoning case. Should have preliminary results by tomorrow morning." I handed over the bottle of pills, watching as she logged them with professional efficiency. "I'm also going to need blood and urine samples from you," Dr. Chang continued. "If he's been drugging you as systematically as you describe, there will be traces in your system even though you stopped taking the pills yesterday. We'll be able to identify exactly what he's been giving you." The samples were taken, labeled, secured, all with proper chain of custody documentation that Sarah insisted on witnessing and photographing. "Now we wait," Sarah said as we left the lab. "Maya, you're not going back to that house. Patricia, can she stay with you?" "Already decided," Patricia confirmed. "Good. I'm filing the emergency restraining order tonight. By morning, Victor won't be able to come within 500 feet of you. I'm also filing for emergency access to your joint accounts and a freeze on all assets pending investigation." Sarah's expression was fierce. "He wanted to play doctor? Fine. Let's see how he likes being examined." That night, in Patricia's spare room with Thunder sleeping at the foot of my bed, I finally allowed myself to feel it all. The fear, the rage, the grief for the 2 years Victor had stolen from me. I cried until my throat was raw, until Thunder whined and put his massive head on my lap in wordless comfort. But I also felt something else. Something that burned brighter than the fear. Determination. Victor had tried to erase me, to reduce me to a confused, dependent shell of a person. And he'd almost succeeded. But I was still here, still fighting. And now I had allies, evidence, and a plan. He'd underestimated me. That would be his biggest mistake. The next morning, Dr. Chang called with preliminary results. "Maya, you need to hear this," she said, and I could hear the controlled anger in her voice. "The pills you gave me contain a cocktail of psychiatric medications, but not what would be prescribed for anxiety or depression. We're talking about antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, and anticholinergics. Drugs used to induce confusion, memory loss, and tremors. Long-term use at the doses you were getting would cause all the symptoms you described. And here's the kicker. Your blood work shows traces of scopolamine." "What's that?" I asked, though part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. It's sometimes called devil's breath. In small doses, it causes suggestibility, memory loss, and hallucinations. In larger doses, it can be fatal. Maya, your husband wasn't just gaslighting you psychologically. He was chemically erasing your ability to resist. This is attempted murder. No question. Sarah was on her phone before Dr. Chang finished speaking. I'm calling the DA's office. With this evidence, we can get criminal charges filed today. Everything moved with terrifying speed after that. The district attorney, a serious woman named Catherine Torres, met with us that afternoon. She reviewed the evidence, Victor's notebook, the financial records, the text messages with Dr. Chen, the toxicology reports, with the methodical focus of a surgeon examining a patient. This is one of the most calculated abuse cases I've seen, she said finally. Mr. Chen didn't just plan to kill you, Mrs. Chen. He created an entire false medical history, corrupted a licensed physician, and systematically destroyed your credibility so that when you died, no one would question it. That's not a crime of passion. That's premeditated murder with fraud and conspiracy charges on top. What happens now? I asked. Now? Now we arrest him. Both of them. Your husband and Dr. Chen. We'll need your testimony, but with the evidence we have, their convictions are almost guaranteed. She paused. Mrs. Chen, I want you to understand something. What your husband did to you is legally classified as torture. He will go to prison for a very long time. The arrests happened that evening. Sarah got the details from her contacts in the DA's office and relayed them to me while I sat in Patricia's living room, thunder's solid warmth anchoring me to reality. Victor had been in his office at the pharmaceutical company where he worked, probably planning his next move, when police arrived. According to witnesses, he'd maintained his calm, concerned demeanor at first, insisting there was some mistake, that his wife was mentally ill and clearly having another episode. Then they'd shown him the notebook, his notebook, in his handwriting, detailing every dose, every symptom, every step of his plan to destroy me. He'd tried to run. They'd caught him in the parking garage. The man who'd spent 2 years carefully, methodically dismantling my mind, had panicked when faced with consequences for his actions. There was something satisfying about that, the controller losing control. Dr. Chen had been arrested at his practice, in the middle of a therapy session with another patient. I wondered how many others he'd betrayed, how many mentally ill patients were actually victims of abuse he'd helped enable. That night, the story broke on the local news. Pharmaceutical executive arrested for attempting to murder wife through systematic poisoning, prominent psychiatrist charged as accomplice. My phone, the one Victor had locked down and controlled, suddenly started buzzing with messages as Sarah had the restrictions removed. Friends I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, reaching out with shock and apologies and offers of support. My sister in Boston, crying as she explained how Victor had told her I didn't want to talk to family anymore. That contact upset me. My former coworkers from the graphic design firm I'd left, saying they'd always wondered why I quit so suddenly. All the connections Victor had severed, all the relationships he'd poisoned with lies, suddenly reconnecting. It was overwhelming and healing in equal measure. 3 months later, I sat in a courtroom and watched Victor Chen, the man I'd married, the man who'd tried to erase me, stand trial for attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Victor's defense attorney tried arguing that the notebook was taken out of context, that the medications were prescribed by Dr. Chen for legitimate purposes, that Victor was just a concerned husband trying to help his sick wife. Then Sarah presented my toxicology reports. The scopolamine levels that had no legitimate medical use, the cocktail of drugs specifically designed to induce psychosis-like symptoms. The expert testimony from Dr. Chang explaining exactly how these substances had been used to systematically destroy my cognitive function. The defense crumbled like sand. Dr. Chen, facing his own trial, had already taken a plea deal, 15 years in prison and permanent revocation of his medical license in exchange for testifying against Victor. On the stand, he explained how Victor had approached him 2 years ago with a proposition: help gaslight a wife in exchange for kickbacks from pharmaceutical sales. Victor had made it seem simple, victimless even. Just prescribe some medications, provide some documentation, collect the money. Dr. Chen claimed he hadn't known about the murder plot. The text messages suggested otherwise, but his testimony was damning enough on its own. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, assault, and a dozen other charges I'd lost track of. The judge, a woman who'd spent the entire trial looking increasingly disgusted, showed no mercy at sentencing. Mr. Chen, you systematically tortured your wife for 2 years with the explicit goal of murdering her and making it look like suicide. You corrupted a medical professional, destroyed your wife's relationships and reputation, and came dangerously close to succeeding in your plan. The level of calculation and cruelty involved in this case is extraordinary. I hereby sentence you to 45 years in state prison without possibility of parole for 25 years. Victor's face, always so controlled, finally cracked. He tried to speak, to protest, but the bailiffs were already leading him away. As he passed my seat, he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since his arrest. I smiled. Not a big smile, nothing triumphant or cruel. Just a small, genuine smile that said, I survived. You lost. His expression crumbled into something raw and desperate, and then he was gone, led away to spend the next quarter-century paying for what he'd tried to do to me. After the sentencing, Sarah, Patricia, and I went to a small restaurant near the courthouse. We didn't celebrate. What had happened to me wasn't something to celebrate. But we acknowledged the victory, the justice, the fact that I'd survived what was meant to kill me. What will you do now? Patricia asked, refilling my water glass with the casual care that had become familiar over the past months of staying with her. Live, I said simply. Paint again. Maybe teach. Definitely therapy. The real kind. With a legitimate doctor. I paused. And I think I want to start an organization for other victims of this kind of abuse. Medical gaslighting, pharmaceutical manipulation, it's more common than people realize. If Victor could almost get away with it, how many others are succeeding? Sarah nodded approvingly. I'll help with the legal structure, pro bono, and I know several other attorneys who'd be interested in supporting something like that. I'll help too, Patricia added. And I know a thing or two about fundraising and community organizing from my wild youth. 6 months after Victor's sentencing, I stood in the studio I'd rented, a beautiful space with north-facing windows and enough room for both painting and pottery wheels. The walls were covered with new work, vibrant and angry and alive, in ways my art had never been before. My first solo show was scheduled for next month. The theme, Resurrection. Pieces exploring memory, identity, gaslighting, and survival. The local art critic who'd previewed it had called it devastatingly honest and hauntingly beautiful. But more importantly, the organization I'd founded, Clarity Alliance, was up and running. We'd helped 12 victims of medical gaslighting in 6 months, connecting them with ethical doctors, attorneys, and support groups. We'd started a database of medical professionals accused of participating in abuse, working with state licensing boards to investigate, and we'd gotten legislation introduced in Oregon making it a specific crime for medical professionals to participate in systematic gaslighting or pharmaceutical abuse of patients. It was just a start, but it was something. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. Coming to visit next weekend. Can't wait to see your studio and meet the famous Patricia and Sarah. Love you. Love you. Words that had meant nothing when Victor said them, weapons he'd used to maintain control. But from my sister, from my newly reconnected friends, from the community I was rebuilding, those words meant everything. I walked to the window and looked out at Portland's skyline, the city where I'd almost died, where I'd been systematically erased by someone who'd promised to love me. But I was still here. Still Maya Chen. Not the victim Victor had tried to create, not the confused shell he'd left behind, but someone new. Someone stronger for having been broken and reassembled herself. My phone buzzed again. This time, a news alert. Dr. Richard Chen pleads guilty to additional charges in medical fraud case. Investigation reveals pattern of abuse enabling spanning multiple patients. More victims coming forward. More justice being served. The system that had failed me, failed us, was finally paying attention. Thunder's distant bark from Patricia's house 3 blocks away made me smile. I'd gotten my own apartment but still had dinner there twice a week. Still helped Patricia with her pottery classes. Still brought Thunder treats that he absolutely didn't need. Some connections, once forged in fire, became unbreakable. That evening, I met with a new member of Clarity Alliance, a woman named Jennifer whose husband, a doctor himself, had been using his medical knowledge to gaslight her for 5 years. She was thin, shaky, her eyes carrying that familiar haunted look I remembered from my own mirror. "I don't know if anyone will believe me," she said, hands trembling around her coffee cup. "He's so respected, and I have no proof. He doesn't write anything down. He's too smart for that." "He thinks he's too smart for that," I corrected gently. "But abusers always make mistakes. They can't help it. The arrogance is part of the profile." I pulled out a notebook, not unlike Victor's, but this one was mine, filled with resources and strategies and the collected wisdom of survivors. First, we document everything. Second, we get you independent medical testing. Third, we connect you with an attorney. And Jennifer? You're not alone anymore. You have an entire network of people who believe you, who've survived this, who will fight for you. Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought I was crazy. He told me I was crazy so many times I started to believe it. "You're not crazy," I said firmly, echoing the words Patricia had spoken to me in that coffee shop 6 months ago. "You're being abused, but we're going to stop him. Together." And we did. Because that's what survivors do. We survive. And then we turn around and pull the next person out of the darkness, one hand extended, one voice saying, "I believe you. You're not alone, and you're going to make it through this." Victor had tried to erase me, to reduce me to nothing, to make me disappear without a trace. Instead, he'd created something he never anticipated. A survivor who wouldn't be silenced, who wouldn't disappear, who would spend the rest of her life making sure no one else suffered what she had. In trying to destroy me, he'd forged me into something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. Someone who knew exactly how predators operated. Someone who knew how to stop them. Someone who would never, ever stop fighting. 3 years later, I stood at a podium in the state capitol building as the governor signed the Maya Chen Act into law, legislation requiring mandatory reporting of suspected pharmaceutical abuse, criminal penalties for medical professionals who participate in gaslighting, and state funding for victim support services. Victor was serving his sentence in a medium-security prison 2 hours away. I'd received a letter from him once, months ago, claiming he was sorry, that he'd loved me, that the pressure of his job had driven him to temporary insanity. I'd burned it without reading past the first paragraph. Some stories don't need closure from the villain. Some stories close themselves when the victim refuses to remain a victim any longer. As I left the Capitol building that day, sun warm on my face, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, confused, frightened, doubting her own mind. I thought about how close I'd come to disappearing entirely, erased by the man who'd promised to love me, but I'd survived. And in surviving, I'd discovered something Victor never understood. You can't erase someone who refuses to disappear. You can't destroy someone who chooses, again and again, to rebuild. Strength isn't never breaking. Strength is breaking completely and then deciding to reassemble yourself into something new, something better. Something that can't be broken the same way twice. I was Maya Chen, survivor, artist, advocate, fighter. And I was done being a victim. Forever. Before we close, I want to thank you for being part of this journey. If Maya's story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel. These stories matter. Survivors' voices matter. And together, we build a community where no one has to suffer in silence. Remember, if you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, you are not alone. Resources are available. Reach out. Speak up. Survive. Thank you for watching. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.